December 19, 1944. The Ardennes lay frozen, a pale sea of snow and silence. Trees stood skeletal, frost clinging to every branch. In the distance, the rumble of engines broke the hush, tanks and trucks advancing over hardened ground, their metal tracks crunching the ice. The air was sharp and cold, each breath visible in the gray dawn. On the front lines, American infantry and armored units pressed forward, led by the unmistakable figure of General George S. Patton. His movements were decisive, relentless, a whirlwind of orders delivered with clarity that cut through the chaos of winter warfare. Columns of Sherman tanks and half-tracks surged like a river of steel, maneuvering through narrow roads and forested passes. Artillery boomed in the distance, echoes bouncing between frozen ridges. Far behind the front, in dimly lit command posts and war rooms, German generals hunched over papers and ledgers. By candlelight, they scribbled furiously into leather-bound diaries, hidden from prying eyes. Each stroke of ink recorded their private thoughts: awe, frustration, disbelief. Patton's name appeared again and again, his audacity, speed, and tactical brilliance provoking respect even as it wrought havoc on their carefully laid plans. Outside, the snow swirled, covering tracks and footprints alike. Within the German lines, anticipation and fear mingled in silence. The war raged, yet another page was being written, not on the battlefield alone, but in the hidden, intimate confessions of men whose world was collapsing under the weight of American steel. And somewhere in the Ardennes, Patton pressed forward, unaware of the private words that would one day reveal just how deeply he had unsettled the enemy. By late 1944, the European theater was a landscape of chaos and exhaustion. The Allies had broken out of Normandy in August, routing German forces across France. Patton's Third Army had been instrumental, racing through the countryside with astonishing speed, often moving over 30 miles a day. Towns were liberated almost before the German command could respond. Roads churned with mud, tanks and trucks lurching forward, engines smoking, soldiers shouting orders over the roar. Patton's reputation was no longer confined to American ears. It traveled ahead, whispered through captured dispatches and intercepted communications. German generals faced a grim reality. Their forces were overextended, supplies scarce, and morale fractured. The Ardennes, densely forested and snowbound, seemed a refuge, but even here, they were vulnerable. High Command had planned a bold counteroffensive, the Ardennes Offensive, later known as the Battle of the Bulge. The aim was audacious: split the Allied lines, capture Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace. Yet beneath the official plans, private concerns gnawed at officers in their war rooms. They recorded, in diaries and journals, doubts about fuel shortages, inexperienced recruits, and the unpredictability of Patton's movements. Patton's Third Army was approaching the northern edge of the German salient. His forces were a well-oiled combination of infantry, armor, and artillery. Sherman's, Cromwell's, and mechanized artillery moved in concert, supported by tanks from the 3rd and 4th Armored Divisions. Reconnaissance units scouted roads, bridges, and forest edges. Every column of men and machines was part of a coordinated plan that emphasized speed, surprise, and relentless pressure. Patton's operational philosophy was clear: aggressive maneuver, continuous engagement, and psychological dominance over the enemy. The German High Command underestimated the impact this approach would have. Diaries reveal their private concerns. Patton did not merely fight battles. He forced choices, created chaos, and pressed weaknesses to the breaking point. Officers described sleepless nights, watching maps with lines of advancing tanks inching closer, knowing each decision could mean encirclement or annihilation. While their official reports maintained confidence, their personal writings reveal a blend of awe, fear, and respect. Communication was another critical factor. Patton emphasized rapid, clear channels between frontline commanders and divisional headquarters. Orders traveled quickly, adjustments were made in real time, and units adapted without hesitation. German generals, relying on slower, rigid hierarchies, struggled to respond. Diaries show frustration with delayed information, miscommunications, and a relentless pace of American maneuvers. Each entry echoed the same theme. The enemy's speed was not just physical. It was mental, an operational tempo that dictated the rhythm of the battlefield. Winter compounded the challenges. Snow and ice slowed trucks and artillery, froze river crossings, and obscured visibility. Yet Patton's forces used these conditions strategically, moving along frozen roads and exploiting gaps that German planners assumed were impassable. Diaries detail how officers noted these maneuvers with astonishment. American tanks and infantry emerging from impossible terrain, forcing defensive positions to collapse before they could be reinforced. By December 19th, the stage was set. Patton's columns were poised on the northern flank of the German offensive. The Ardennes forest, thick with snow and shadow, would become both a proving ground and a trap. German generals, huddled in dimly lit rooms, recorded their thoughts in secrecy. Predictions, fears, grudging admiration. These entries, never intended for eyes beyond the officer's own, would later reveal the depth of Patton's psychological impact. He was not merely an adversary. He was a force that unsettled entire commands, shifting the way the German high command perceived the war. The battlefield, frozen and tense, awaited the collision. American forces pressed forward, engines rumbling, artillery crackling in the distance. German generals wrote by candlelight, aware that their next moves would determine survival or destruction. And through it all, Patton's presence, real, immediate, unstoppable, loomed over both the snow and the pages of secret diaries. While official reports painted a picture of controlled operations, the private diaries of German generals reveal a strikingly different story. These men, seasoned by years of warfare, were acutely aware of the pressures facing their units. Yet, in their personal writings, they admitted to fears they would never voice publicly. Patton's name appeared repeatedly, often with underlined emphasis, as officers struggled to capture his impact in words. His audacity, his speed, his uncanny ability to exploit weaknesses. Generals writing from command bunkers in Belgium and Luxembourg described the psychological toll of facing him. Maps were spread across tables, lines of tanks and infantry advancing like inked rivers of inevitability. Officers scribbled observations in cursive and block letters. The Americans strike where we are unprepared, move faster than our intelligence allows, appear where they should be nowhere. Each entry was a testament to the strain imposed by an opponent who did not simply engage in battle, but dominated tempo, forcing Germans to react under pressure. These diaries also illustrate the German reliance on traditional doctrine. Many officers noted frustration that Patton ignored expected patterns, rendering careful plans obsolete. Where German strategy emphasized preparation, fortified positions, and methodical engagement, Patton relied on speed, surprise, and flexibility. Soldiers and commanders alike were unsettled by an adversary who seemed to anticipate both terrain and enemy hesitation. The personal writings capture a rare honesty. Officers questioned not only their orders, but the very assumptions of armored warfare that had guided them for years. Patton's operational style also influenced morale indirectly. In some entries, generals acknowledged admiration for his decisiveness, even as they lamented its consequences. Phrases like unpredictable brilliance and relentless machine recur, highlighting the duality of fear and respect. They recorded the frustration of losing ground not because of overwhelming numbers, but because of tactical mastery. The diaries reveal a recurring theme. The enemy's leadership, not just his forces, could disrupt an entire front. Logistics and timing were a constant concern. German diaries document the struggle to move units quickly enough to counter Patton's thrusts. Roads were clogged, rail networks overextended, and fuel shortages compounded the problem. American mechanized units, by contrast, maintained operational momentum, often arriving ahead of German expectations. Generals noted that even when units were numerically superior, they could not respond in time. The Americans had seized the initiative, and with it, the narrative of the battlefield. Additionally, these writings provide insight into the German view of Allied coordination. Patton's ability to integrate infantry, armor, artillery, and air support was repeatedly highlighted. German officers marveled, or despaired, at the seamless execution, noting that his forces acted with a single purpose, reducing the advantage of entrenched positions. In contrast, German command structures, rigid and compartmentalized, hindered rapid response. Diaries reveal an awareness that leadership, as much as firepower, determined the course of engagements. By December 19, 1944, as the Ardennes battle escalated, German generals' diaries reflected a convergence of admiration, fear, and desperation. They recognized that Patton's advance was not merely tactical, it was psychological. The Americans had mastered a tempo that the German high command struggled to match. Every movement, every engagement, forced reflection and reassessment, documented meticulously in private pages. The personal writings also underscore the human dimension. Officers were aware of their own mortality and the vulnerability of their troops. Observations about men frozen in the trenches, soldiers demoralized by rapid losses, and units retreating under relentless pressure fill the pages. These entries reveal the intimate cost of Patton's campaigns: fear, exhaustion, and the erosion of confidence, all captured in words that would remain secret until after the war. By blending operational facts with human insight, these diaries illuminate a hidden battlefield, one fought not only with guns and tanks, but in the minds of those confronting an extraordinary adversary. Patton's influence extended beyond maps and orders. It penetrated the private reflections of Germany's most senior officers, shaping their perception of the war in ways that would only become fully visible after the conflict ended. Human angle, fear and respect in private writings. The diaries of German generals offer a rare glimpse into the human dimension of warfare. Beyond maps and troop movements, these pages record raw emotion, fear, frustration, and, surprisingly, respect. Many entries describe sleepless nights, staring at maps as Patton's movements erased careful defensive plans. Officers wrote of men frozen in anticipation and units paralyzed by the pace of advance. Yet the tone also reveals admiration for his decisiveness. Patton was not merely an opponent. He was a force that challenged assumptions and compelled generals to confront their own limitations. These human reactions highlight the psychological impact of leadership. Soldiers in the field could face tanks, artillery, or machine guns, but German generals faced Patton himself. His audacity, relentless pressure, and operational ingenuity instilled a mixture of awe and dread, recorded with honesty that official reports never conveyed. In this sense, the battlefield extended into the minds of enemy commanders, where personal reflection captured a secondary yet critical front of the war. Leadership angle, audacity, and initiative. Patton's leadership style was a key factor in shaping German perception. He embodied initiative, speed, and flexibility, qualities that repeatedly forced commanders into reactive postures. Diaries repeatedly note his ability to exploit terrain, anticipate German moves, and maintain operational momentum. Officers described moments where entire defensive plans became irrelevant within hours due to his sudden advances or flanking maneuvers. These writings underscore a profound truth: leadership can redefine the battlefield. Patton's presence magnified the effectiveness of his forces, and German commanders acknowledged this privately. One general noted the unpredictable brilliance of American operations, a recognition that skillful leadership could outweigh numerical or positional advantages. The human dimension of command, as captured in these diaries, reveals that Patton's greatest weapon was often his mind rather than his tanks. Tactical angle, maneuver warfare, and speed. From a tactical standpoint, Patton's campaigns illustrated the effectiveness of maneuver warfare. German diaries frequently highlight his rapid armored thrusts, the integration of infantry and artillery, and the ability to capitalize on small vulnerabilities in defensive lines. Officers noted that even when numerically superior, German forces struggled to respond. Patton's emphasis on speed disrupted command chains, forcing units to react hastily, often with incomplete information. Entries emphasized the logistical elegance behind these operations. Artillery and supply lines kept pace, reconnaissance identified weak points, and coordinated assaults allowed small forces to achieve disproportionate effect. German generals, trained in methodical engagement strategies, found themselves outpaced and outmaneuvered. The diaries reveal a grudging acknowledgement of tactical genius, tempered by frustration at the inability to counteract these rapid movements. Psychological angle, disruption of enemy confidence. Patton's influence extended into the minds of German commanders. Diaries convey that his advance created a sense of disorientation and uncertainty that was as potent as any weapon. Officers recorded hesitation, delayed decisions, and the breakdown of previously reliable strategies. Even well-fortified positions seemed vulnerable, not because of overwhelming force, but because the enemy's perception of control had been eroded. The psychological disruption was amplified by the secrecy and intensity of operations. Patton's speed, combined with aggressive use of terrain and deception, caused German generals to question assumptions about Allied capabilities. They admitted privately that his presence forced them to constantly second-guess, undermining confidence in both doctrine and subordinates. In this context, the diaries serve as both battlefield documentation and a study of the human cost of facing an extraordinary adversary. These four angles, human, leadership, tactical, and psychological, illustrate the multifaceted effect Patton had on German generals. He was a figure who shaped the battlefield not only through force, but through perception, imposing pressure that extended beyond guns and tanks into minds and morale. The impact of technology, operational integration, and a broader enemy perspective remains to be explored. These aspects further reveal how Patton's presence influenced both immediate outcomes and strategic thinking. Technological and operational angle, combined arms mastery. Patton's campaigns were not defined by tanks alone. They were a demonstration of operational integration. Diaries revealed German generals' fascination and frustration with how infantry, armor, artillery, and air support were coordinated. Tank units advanced in concert with infantry. Engineers cleared obstacles, and artillery suppressed strongpoints ahead of the main thrust. Reconnaissance units scouted roads, bridges, and enemy positions, ensuring that every maneuver had situational awareness. German generals noted the technological advantages of American forces as well. Sherman tanks, though often outclassed individually, were employed in numbers with precision, supported by superior communication and command systems. Radios allowed for real-time adjustments that German units, with slower hierarchical structures, could not replicate. The diaries reveal that German officers understood the advantage was not simply the equipment, but how it was employed. Patton's forces functioned as a single, responsive organism. Enemy perspective, admiration amid frustration. Across entries, a recurring theme emerges, grudging respect for Patton, even as he inflicted chaos. Some generals admitted that his ability to predict their maneuvers and strike unexpected positions caused awe. Phrases like, "he moves like lightning," or "he sees beyond the battlefield" appear repeatedly. Yet this respect was intertwined with frustration. Every success of the Americans revealed weaknesses in German planning and highlighted the limits of doctrine when confronted with an audacious opponent. These observations illustrate a unique dimension of warfare. The opponent is more than an abstract threat. Patton became a psychological entity, an idea of operational pressure that forced German commanders to act differently than they might have otherwise. They recognized that the man, not just his forces, altered the conduct of war. Moral and ethical angle. Reflection under pressure. Diaries also capture moral and ethical contemplation, though rarely acknowledged publicly. German generals recorded their unease at witnessing rapid losses among their own units, the collapse of positions, and the relentless pursuit of Patton's forces. There is evidence of internal questioning. Were failures due solely to their own command, or did they face an opponent whose skill demanded respect? Some entries reflect admiration for the courage and decisiveness displayed, even as they grappled with frustration over the inability to counteract it. This moral dimension underscores the human cost of war beyond casualties. Officers wrote candidly about men frozen in fear, decisions made too late, and the erosion of confidence in long-standing strategies. The diaries illustrate that leadership is as much about perception and morality as it is about firepower. Patton's influence extended into the conscience of those he opposed. Strategic angle. Influence on operational planning. Patton's maneuvers had consequences beyond immediate engagements. Diaries reveal that German generals frequently adjusted broader strategic planning in reaction to his advances. Defensive positions were reinforced, reserves repositioned, and communication lines stressed to keep pace with American tempo. In many cases, these adjustments were reactive, creating opportunities elsewhere on the front. One notable observation in a captured diary reads, "Every day, we respond to him. Never do we dictate the battle. His speed forces us to commit prematurely, to make choices we would otherwise delay. His presence alone reshapes the battlefield." Such reflections highlight how Patton's operational style forced German commanders into a defensive posture, allowing him to dictate the terms of engagement across multiple theaters. Summary of angles. Through these lenses, technological, enemy perception, moral, and strategic, the extent of Patton's impact becomes evident. He was not merely a field commander. He was an operational phenomenon. His audacity, combined with coordination, speed, and psychological pressure, forced German generals to adapt, react, and reflect in ways that were previously unprecedented. Diaries serve as an intimate record of this influence, providing historians a window into how leadership can ripple across both armies and minds. The cumulative effect of these angles naturally leads to the climax/turning point, where Patton's audacity and operational brilliance translated into decisive battlefield outcomes, forcing German generals to confront his unparalleled effectiveness firsthand. December 23, 1944. The Ardennes was a frozen labyrinth of snow, trees, and narrow roads. German defensive positions, meticulously prepared in secret, now trembled under the relentless pressure of Patton's Third Army. American columns advanced with precision, tanks rolling over icy roads, infantry moving in coordinated formations through dense forests. Artillery boomed from concealed positions, echoing across ridges, each strike chipping away at enemy morale and defensive integrity. Patton himself was at the helm, not merely issuing orders, but orchestrating a symphony of movement. Units were directed to exploit gaps in the German lines, cross frozen rivers, and flank positions that had seemed impregnable. His strategy emphasized tempo and surprise, maneuvers that German generals recognized immediately in their diaries. One entry noted, "Patton moves where we cannot anticipate. Every ridge he crosses threatens collapse." The German command scrambled. Tank divisions attempted counterattacks, hoping to slow the advance of Sherman and Cromwell units, supported by mechanized infantry. Yet the Americans had integrated reconnaissance, artillery, and armor to such an extent that even coordinated German responses faltered. Reports and diaries described frantic attempts to realign units under fire. Officers huddled over maps, marking positions already compromised by American movement. One critical engagement near Bastogne exemplified this tension. Patton's forces approached the town from multiple directions, utilizing roads assumed impassable in winter conditions. German diaries recorded disbelief at the audacity, tanks traversing narrow passes, artillery establishing firing positions on frozen hills, infantry screening advances with calculated precision. Defensive plans that had taken days to prepare were rendered obsolete in hours. "We are forced to react," one general wrote, "never to act." The human dimension of this turning point is stark. German soldiers, previously confident behind fortified positions, found themselves exposed to relentless pressure. Diaries recount exhaustion, frostbite, and fear. Officers express frustration at losses that seemed to stem less from firepower than from the unyielding tempo imposed by Patton. The Third Army's advance was surgical and psychological. Each movement eroded confidence, creating hesitation that multiplied its effectiveness. Air support amplified the effect. Reconnaissance planes tracked German positions, while fighter bombers disrupted supply lines and communications. German generals noted that even with numerical parity in certain sectors, coordination and morale were decisive. Patton strikes with thought as much as force. One entry reads, "Our numbers are irrelevant when we cannot anticipate his intent." The diaries also reveal a subtle admiration amid fear. Officers acknowledge the brilliance of rapid maneuvers, the foresight in exploiting terrain, and the audacity to push units beyond conventional expectations. Even as positions crumbled, the tone reflects recognition. Patton was not merely lucky or aggressive. He was systematically decisive. "He dictates the rhythm of the battle," a general wrote, "and we follow." By the evening of December 23rd, the battlefield was transformed. Roads once controlled by German units were overrun, towns faced encirclement, and reserves were committed hastily, often into situations they could not influence. Patton's forces maintained momentum, preventing the Germans from regrouping. Diaries describe officers' hands trembling over ink, noting losses, gaps, and the growing inevitability of defeat. This first wave of decisive movements set the stage for further advances. German units, exhausted and demoralized, faced an opponent who combined audacity, coordination, and psychological insight. Patton had not only crossed lines and taken ground. He had rewritten the expectations of German commanders. Their private writings, raw and immediate, recorded the moment they realized the operational superiority they confronted was not coincidental, but the product of disciplined, relentless leadership. As darkness fell over the Ardennes, the snow-strewn roads and shattered defenses bore silent witness. The collision of strategy, speed, and human determination had reached a critical inflection point. The Third Army's advance was unstoppable for the moment, and German generals, ink-stained and exhausted, faced the undeniable reality. Patton was reshaping the battlefield, forcing reactions rather than allowing initiative. The momentum achieved in these first decisive engagements naturally leads to Climax Section 2, where Patton's relentless advance and operational mastery culminate in the moments that would leave German generals' diaries filled with awe, fear, and recognition of his unparalleled leadership. December 24th to 26th, 1944. The Ardennes winter tightened its grip, snow and ice blanketing roads and forest trails. Yet Patton's Third Army pressed forward with relentless precision. Units navigated frozen rivers, narrow passes, and heavily defended crossroads, exploiting gaps German generals had assumed impassable. The tempo of the advance left German forces scrambling, often reacting to situations that no longer existed. Diaries from the high command reveal a recurring theme: amazement, fear, and grudging respect. "He moves with the foresight of a man who knows what we intend before we do," one general wrote, the ink smudged from trembling hands. The siege of Bastogne marked the pinnacle of this turning point. German units had surrounded the town, intending to cut off American supply lines. But Patton, recognizing both the strategic importance and the psychological weight of relief, orchestrated a rapid advance from the north and east. Columns of tanks, artillery, and mechanized infantry converged with astonishing speed, navigating snowbound roads while under sporadic fire. German diaries record disbelief. The town, they noted, should not have been reachable in such time, under these conditions. Yet Patton's operational genius made it possible. Throughout these critical days, German commanders documented their frustration with operational rigidity. Divisions attempting counterattacks were consistently outmaneuvered. Roads thought secure were blocked, flanking positions captured, and defensive reserves committed too late. Every position we fortify is tested in ways we cannot anticipate, an officer admitted. The psychological impact of this pace proved as destructive as any artillery shell. Hesitation and confusion spread like wildfire among troops accustomed to methodical planning. Patton's use of combined arms intensified the effect. Tanks supported by infantry screened the flanks, while artillery laid suppressive fire ahead of advancing columns. Air reconnaissance identified weaknesses and alerted ground commanders to German movements. Diaries reveal admiration for this integration. One entry reads, "He does not fight battles. He orchestrates them, weaving each unit into a cohesive force that leaves us unprepared at every turn." The Germans were facing not just a tactical opponent, but an operational phenomenon. The human element on both sides amplified the drama. Soldiers witnessed tanks rolling through snow, infantry advancing under artillery cover, and enemy positions collapsing before reinforcements could arrive. German generals, writing in candlelight, acknowledged the extraordinary morale impact. "Our men hesitate where they should act," one officer noted. "They fear the speed and decisiveness of his command as much as the firepower itself." By December 26th, the operational outcomes were undeniable. Bastogne was relieved, German attacks stalled, and American momentum surged. German units were depleted, their reserves scattered, and defensive positions destabilized. Diaries captured a pivotal realization. Patton's leadership was not merely effective, it was decisive. Officers wrote with a mixture of despair and admiration, recording that their defensive calculations had been repeatedly nullified, not by superior numbers, but by ingenuity, audacity, and relentless operational pressure. Patton's movements also reshaped the broader campaign. German divisions were forced into premature withdrawals, supply lines disrupted, and strategic options limited. The Third Army dictated engagements, forcing Germans into positions of reaction rather than initiative. The diaries reveal that even those who had previously doubted American capabilities now acknowledged the breadth of his impact. One general wrote, "The man himself has become the instrument of our undoing." By the close of this sequence, the turning point was clear. Patton had combined speed, tactical mastery, and psychological pressure to achieve operational dominance. German generals, who had once believed themselves in control of the Ardennes, faced the stark reality that their plans were being systematically dismantled. Their private reflections, fearful, candid, and at times admiring, documented a battlefield transformed not solely by firepower, but by leadership, vision, and execution. The events of these days set the stage for the aftermath, where we examine the operational consequences, shifts in morale, and the long-term impact on German command perception and Allied momentum. As the snow-laden Ardennes forest settled into an uneasy calm after the intense clashes of December 1944, the consequences of Patton's relentless advance became evident. German forces had been forced into defensive postures they had hoped to avoid. The tactical surprise and speed of the American Third Army not only disrupted planned counteroffensives, but also revealed fundamental weaknesses in German logistics, coordination, and morale. Diaries from captured generals provide a rare window into the immediate psychological and operational aftermath. Officers wrote candidly about the collapse of carefully laid plans. Supply lines were severed, reserves misallocated, and troops exhausted by continuous pressure. One diary entry laments, "We prepared for attack, yet our formations are in disarray. He moves where we are weakest, and even when reinforced, he outpaces us." German soldiers, confronted with relentless mechanized units and rapid maneuvers, often abandoned positions without engaging fully, a testament to the dual power of Patton's operational pressure and psychological influence. The operational impact extended beyond localized engagements. German divisions, previously confident in their ability to respond to Allied movements, were compelled to stretch resources thin across multiple fronts. Defensive positions that had been assumed secure were now vulnerable, with reports noting that American tanks penetrated flanks and rear areas with unsettling frequency. Diaries reflect the tension this caused at the highest levels. Generals had to constantly reevaluate strategy, often without sufficient information or time to act effectively. Patton's integration of infantry, artillery, and armor amplified this effect. Coordinated assaults allowed relatively small units to achieve disproportionate results. German diary entries describe astonishment at American efficiency. A handful of tanks supported by artillery and infantry can achieve what we cannot in days of preparation. His operations are a lesson in execution. The recurring sentiment is clear. Patton's genius lay not solely in aggressive action, but in orchestrating combined arms in a way that German commanders could not match. The diaries also reveal a profound psychological dimension. Generals reflected on the fear and hesitation spreading among their troops. One officer observed, "Our men no longer advance with confidence. They hesitate, anticipating him at every ridge and crossroads. He has made us cautious where we once were bold." This disruption of morale was as significant as physical losses. Soldiers confronted by Patton's forces found their judgment and confidence eroded, forcing German commanders to manage fear as much as enemy action. Captured generals further noted the operational adaptability of Patton's forces. When terrain, weather, or unexpected resistance threatened to slow the advance, the Third Army adjusted with speed and decisiveness. Bridges were secured or bypassed, flanking maneuvers executed, and artillery repositioned to maintain momentum. German diaries frequently recorded disbelief at the ability of American units to maintain coordination and initiative under adverse conditions. "Even under snow and ice, he strikes with precision," one general wrote. The human toll was evident as well. Diaries detail exhaustion, frostbite, and attrition among German troops. Casualty reports and personal observations paint a picture of units stretched thin, morale deteriorating, and leadership under intense stress. In contrast, American forces, though facing similar winter hardships, maintained operational rhythm, further enhancing the psychological pressure on German commanders. By the end of this phase, the battlefield had shifted. Patton had not only relieved encircled units and disrupted enemy offensives, but had also forced German generals into a constant state of reaction. The immediate aftermath was a mixture of tactical success for the Allies and profound operational disarray for the Germans. Diaries reveal a candid recognition of this imbalance, highlighting the depth of Patton's impact. He had transformed not only terrain and front lines, but also the perceptions, decisions, and morale of his adversaries. The Ardennes, once assumed to be a secure stronghold for German forces, had become a proving ground for Patton's operational philosophy. The physical and psychological outcomes of these engagements laid the foundation for strategic advantages that would carry forward into subsequent campaigns. These effects naturally lead into Aftermath Section 2, where we examine broader strategic consequences, numbers, destruction, and how German high command adjusted their plans in response to Patton's relentless campaigns. By early January 1945, the Ardennes campaign had left an indelible mark on both sides. Patton's Third Army had not only relieved Bastogne, but had shattered the operational rhythm of German forces across the northern sector of the offensive. Captured diaries of German generals reveal the extent of disruption. They recorded the loss of initiative, the exhaustion of reserves, and a growing sense that the American commander dictated the tempo of battle. Operationally, German divisions were stretched beyond sustainable limits. Units were withdrawn from key positions to plug gaps elsewhere, leaving strategic points underdefended. One diary entry notes, "We are reacting to every thrust. There is no room for deliberate strategy. This acknowledgement underscores a critical consequence. Patton's rapid maneuvering transformed the defensive into a reactive posture, forcing German commanders to constantly realign their formations. Supply lines were severed, artillery emplacements abandoned, and communication networks strained, further amplifying operational inefficiency. German morale suffered alongside logistics. Officers wrote candidly about troops demoralized by continuous American advances, the relentless pressure, and the unpredictability of their opponent. Diaries frequently described shock at the audacity of Patton's operations. Even when exhausted, he advances. Our men fear the ground they hold. This psychological effect was a strategic multiplier. Soldiers hesitated, defensive positions collapsed prematurely, and the coordination between German units deteriorated, creating openings Patton exploited decisively. Strategic consequences extended beyond the immediate battlefield. Patton's advance forced High Command to reconsider allocations across the Western Front. Reserves intended for other sectors were diverted, weakening positions elsewhere and accelerating the overall collapse of German resistance. Diary entries reflect this tension, revealing internal debates and uncertainty. Our plans are compromised daily by speed and unpredictability. Every diversion weakens another front. These candid reflections highlight how one commander's operational philosophy can resonate across an entire theater of war. The destruction wrought during these engagements was both physical and psychological. Entire villages bore the scars of artillery bombardment. Roads were rendered impassable, and armored units lay destroyed or abandoned in snowdrifts. Diaries detail the human cost. Soldiers frostbitten, wounded, or captured. Yet alongside loss, officers repeatedly noted admiration for American discipline, efficiency, and operational cohesion. One entry reads, "We are beaten, not by numbers alone, but by the coordination of his forces and the clarity of his command." Casualty figures and operational reports confirm these observations. While precise numbers vary, German losses in the Ardennes exceeded tens of thousands in personnel and hundreds of armored vehicles. Allied forces sustained lower losses relative to the scale of engagement, benefiting from operational planning, coordination, and Patton's leadership. The captured diaries contextualize these figures, showing the perception of devastation from the German perspective, a collapse of structure, confidence, and initiative. The long-term impact was profound. German generals, reflecting privately, acknowledged that Patton's campaigns had redefined expectations of armored warfare. Speed, coordination, and psychological pressure had proven decisive, forcing a reconsideration of doctrine. Entries describe lessons learned, both grudgingly and with admiration, noting that the Third Army's performance exemplified a new model of operational effectiveness. Patton's leadership was recognized not as luck, but as disciplined, audacious, and transformative. By the close of the Ardennes, the battlefield had been reshaped. German forces were exhausted, morale weakened, and the initiative firmly in Allied hands. Patton had not only achieved immediate tactical victories, but had altered the strategic landscape, forcing adversaries into reaction and reevaluation. Diaries reveal the private acknowledgement of a truth that public reports could not convey. The man himself, his audacity, decisiveness, and operational mastery, had become an instrument of Allied success. These outcomes naturally lead to the reflection/closure, where we examine the broader meaning of these events. What Patton's leadership revealed about warfare, human psychology, technology, and the enduring lessons captured in the private words of his adversaries. Patton's campaigns in the Ardennes reveal a truth that transcends maps and numbers. Leadership shapes the battlefield as profoundly as any weapon. The diaries of captured German generals capture this with rare honesty. They document fear, frustration, admiration, and awe, not at the destruction wrought by tanks and artillery alone, but at the relentless mind directing them. Patton's audacity, speed, and operational clarity forced enemies to react, to anticipate, and ultimately to concede that the war was being waged on his terms. These personal reflections highlight the human dimension of conflict. War is often measured in units, losses, and territory, but the psychological pressure exerted by a single effective commander can ripple through entire armies. The captured writings show officers questioning long-held doctrines, recognizing the fragility of carefully constructed plans when confronted with decisiveness and adaptability. In the Ardennes, Patton did more than relieve Bastogne or push tanks through frozen forests. He reshaped how German commanders perceived warfare itself. Technologically, the campaign underscores the integration of combined arms. Infantry, artillery, armor, and air power moved in concert, maximizing effect and minimizing delay. But even these advantages were amplified by the human element: vision, courage, and decision-making under pressure. The Third Army's efficiency was not solely mechanical. It was intellectual, anticipatory, and unrelenting. The Ardennes also reminds us of the lasting value of observation. Diaries, once private, offer a window into the enemy's mind, revealing that history is not written solely in victories and defeats, but in the thoughts, fears, and acknowledgments of those who faced extraordinary adversaries. Patton's legacy, therefore, is not only in the ground he seized, but in the lasting impression he left on those who opposed him. Ultimately, the story of Patton in the eyes of German generals is a story of human insight into leadership, of courage confronting audacity, and of operational brilliance challenging tradition. It is a reminder that the greatest impact a commander can have often lies not just in what is fought, but in what is perceived, feared, and respected long after the snow melts from the battlefield.